2,000 years ago, survival was not a choice but the very rhythm of life. On the endless savannah, where the sun bled fire into the horizon, a small band of humans stood uncertain yet unbroken. The grass whispered secrets of predators lurking nearby, and the distant herd of antelopes reminded them that food and danger were forever bound together. With only stone axes, wooden spears, and skins stitched from the remains of fallen beasts, they carried the weight of survival in their trembling hands. Fear burned in their hearts, but courage forced them forward. In the silence of the ancient forest, life was both gift and threat. The towering trees shielded them from the harsh sun but concealed creatures with sharper teeth and swifter claws. Every rustle of leaves could be wind, or the predator waiting to strike. With careful hands, they dug for roots, gathered berries, and listened to the echo of survival in their own racing hearts. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, but vigilance was their shield. In this world, the price of distraction was death. Night was the truest test of courage. Fire was their only guardian, its glow pushing back the devouring black. Around it, men, women, and children clung to one another, whispering stories of ancestors to drown out the growl of unseen beasts. Beyond the flames, pairs of glowing eyes blinked from the brush, predators measuring the weakness of their prey. The fire cracked, the night breathed heavy, and the people knew that until dawn broke, their survival was balanced on embers. Water promised life, but it was also a trap. They came to the river to feed their starving families, but the river fed monsters too. With sharpened spears, they waited for the flash of silver beneath the surface. Their eyes darted from the rippling current to the hidden depths, where ancient jaws waited in silence. Each strike of the spear was a gamble with death, for hunger dared them to reach farther, to risk more. In this eternal struggle, the river always chose its victims. Hunting was not sport, it was survival carved into bone. The gazelles stood graceful in the distance, their legs designed for escape, their ears tuned for danger. With hearts pounding, the hunters crept closer, their bare feet sinking into the earth. Each breath was measured, each step a prayer. A single mistake would scatter the herd and doom the children waiting with hollow stomachs back at camp. For these early humans, one kill meant life, and one failure meant famine. The storm was merciless, tearing through the sky with the rage of gods unseen. Rain struck like stones, washing away the fragile fire that was their only defense. Huddled under stone, they shook with cold, their skins drenched, their spirits battered. Lightning split the heavens, casting shadows of terror across the land. Yet within their trembling hearts, the will to endure burned hotter than any storm. For every tempest that threatened to erase them, survival was their answer. The desert was a trial by fire. Heat pressed down upon them like a weight, stealing their breath, boiling their blood. Their mouths longed for water, their shadows stretched thin and weak across the sand. Each step was a promise to endure, though death circled above with wings of patience. To cross the desert was madness, but to remain was certain doom. And so, with blistered skin and blistered hope, they moved forward, because stillness was surrender. Even in their struggle, they longed for more than survival, they longed to be remembered. With stone tools, they carved into the cliffside the echoes of hunts, the fury of storms, the faces of the fallen. These crude marks were not mere scratches, they were a defiance of time itself. For as the winds erased footprints and fire turned to ash, the stone would remain. And the children, eyes wide with wonder, learned that to survive was not only to live, but to leave behind a story. Victory often carried danger's shadow. Their prey limped, blood marking the path to triumph, but the canyon walls carried another secret. Above, the leopard crouched, muscles coiled, eyes fixed on the distracted hunters. The echoes of triumph masked the silence of death stalking them from above. Survival demanded focus, but hunger clouded their minds. In the canyon of stone, the hunters were no longer the hunters. They were the hunted. Around the fragile circle of firelight, life continued in small, defiant ways. With aching hands, they cracked bones to reach the marrow, the hidden treasure of nourishment. The elders' voices, raspy with age, spoke of spirits, of beasts, of the darkness that tested their kind. Yet among them, children laughed, chasing shadows with innocence unbroken by fear. In that moment, though hunger burned and predators waited, they were more than survivors, they were a people, bound together by fire and hope. The swamp was a world between life and death. The air was thick, buzzing with insects, heavy with the stench of decay. With every step, mud clung to their feet like chains, and the water whispered of monsters beneath. Crocodiles slid silently below the reeds, and snakes swam with patient hunger. Yet hunger drove them forward, daring them to risk the unseen. In this place, survival demanded silence, patience, and the courage to face a world that devoured the careless. To climb was to defy nature itself. Fingers bled against sharp stone, breath froze in their throats, and the wind screamed as though the mountain resented their presence. Yet up they climbed, for the high places offered shelter, safety, and sometimes food. Each foothold was a prayer, each slip a threat of death. But still they rose, for survival had taught them a truth: those who dared the impossible often lived longer than those who cowered below. Dawn was both promise and farewell. The fire, reduced to smoke and ash, had carried them through the night, but now it was time to move. The world offered no permanence, every day demanded motion, every night a new shelter. With children tied close to their mothers and elders leaning on crude staffs, they walked into the unknown. The earth beneath their feet was both enemy and ally, but they pressed forward, for to stay still was to starve. Within the cave, time itself seemed to speak. The walls carried whispers of those who had struggled before them: hunters, dreamers, survivors. With torches in hand, they traced fingers over painted animals and faded handprints. In that moment, they were not alone, they were part of something greater, a chain of survival that stretched back through ages. The cave reminded them of a truth often forgotten in hunger and fear: they were not just surviving, they were becoming. Tools were the difference between prey and predator. With patient hands, they struck stone against stone, shaping edges sharp enough to pierce hide and bone. Sparks leapt, marking the birth of survival in its purest form. Children watched wide-eyed, for they knew this knowledge was more precious than food itself. A tool was not just stone, it was life extended, hunger answered, danger defied. In each strike, they forged not just weapons, but the future. Wolves were both kin and enemy, hunters bound by hunger. Their eyes glowed like embers in the falling dark, watching, waiting, testing the courage of the firelit humans. Spears trembled, hands slick with fear, but no one turned away. The night was a standoff, a silent question carved into the dusk: who would break first? Survival was not always about strength. Sometimes, it was about staring into the eyes of death and refusing to yield. The grasslands were a labyrinth of shadows. Blades of grass swayed taller than men, concealing hunters with sharper claws and faster strides. Every step forward was a gamble with unseen death. The people moved slowly, listening to the silence, sensing the eyes that watched from the green. Fear pressed into their skin like the heat of the sun, but to stop was to surrender. They pushed forward, hearts hammering, each step daring fate itself. The sea was both mystery and blessing. Its waves carried voices older than memory, its depths promised food and fear alike. They gathered shells and speared fish from shallow pools, yet their eyes lingered on the endless horizon. What lay beyond the crashing surf, none could know. But even then, the ocean called to them, stirring dreams of journeys not yet born. In its song, they heard both survival and destiny. Fire gave life, but when untamed, it became death itself. The flames roared like a living beast, leaping across grass and tree, devouring all without mercy. Smoke choked the sky, and the air burned in their lungs as they fled. In the chaos, predators and prey ran side by side, all equal before the inferno. Survival was no longer about weapons or strength, it was about outrunning the hunger of fire. Death was never far. Wrapped in skins and placed among stones, the fallen were returned to the earth that had both fed and starved them. Around the body, voices rose in low chants, carrying sorrow into the sky. Tears carved tracks through dust-stained cheeks, but grief was more than loss, it was memory, it was respect. In their mourning, they remembered that life was fragile, but dignity was eternal. Even in death, survival meant being remembered. Even in the harshest struggle, joy survived. The children laughed, chasing the river's reflection, their voices light as wind through grass. For a brief moment, the burden of survival lifted, replaced by the purity of innocence. Yet the adults' eyes never rested, scanning the brush, watching the water, guarding the fragile spark of the future. For in those laughing children, hope lived on. Famine was the cruelest enemy, silent and unrelenting. Bellies shrank, bones pressed against skin, and each step felt heavier than the last. But though despair clawed at their hearts, they did not stop. They gathered what they could, hunted what they might, and clung to the will to endure. For survival was not just about food, it was about refusing to bow to hopelessness. Even in hunger, they carried fire within. The stars told stories no fire could match. Millions of lights burned in the vast black, stirring awe and questions that had no answer. Were they alone? Were the stars ancestors, watching, guiding, warning? In the silence, their eyes shone with wonder. Survival belonged to the earth, but the stars awakened something more, something that whispered of destiny beyond survival, beyond fear. In the night sky, they saw eternity. The dawn stretched wide, painting the savannah in gold. Together, they walked, men, women, children, elders, all bound by the fragile thread of survival. Spears rested heavy, but heavier still was the knowledge of what lay ahead: hunger, danger, hope. Each step carried them toward uncertainty, yet also toward tomorrow. For survival was not lived in moments of rest, but in the endless march of courage into the unknown. At the top of the hill, the world opened before them, wild, dangerous, magnificent. The wind carried both challenge and promise, whispering across the savannah. They stood together, scars on their bodies, hunger in their bellies, but fire in their hearts. 2,000 years ago, survival was not certain, yet they chose it every day. They were fragile, yet unbreakable. They were hunted, yet enduring. And in their defiance of death, they became the ancestors of us all.